Now you've seen me build these MJT Bogies before, namely on the DMU video and the LMS brake van video. I've got a couple of projects lined up that's going to use these again. So instead of repeating myself, I thought I'd give them their own little video and reference them in the future videos. Along with the instructions that are in the packet, there's one brass fret and a little bag of beads, which I tend not to use. Before we cut anything out, we'll get a bit of emery cloth. I use a piece of 240 grit and turn that tarnished piece of brass into a nice shiny piece of brass. Not only does this make it easier to solder, it also gives the paint and glues a better chance of gripping onto it. The parts that the emery cloth don't get is normally the etched fold lines and any other etches like the circles that you can see here. A fibre pencil will do the trick. Cutting the main frames out is the next thing, and then we're going to bend them up on the bending tool thingamajig. The bending tool jig thing is quite an expensive piece of kit, but it's probably worth the money if you do any number of kits with lots of etched parts. However, it does have its limitations, and there are some parts on this kit especially that cannot be done with it, and you need a poking tool and a pair of flat-nosed pliers. Next we come to probably my favourite part of building these bogies, dropping a piece of solder into all of the folded corners. I think if you haven't got a soldering iron or you're not confident enough to do it, I think super glue or araldite would do just as good a job. Before we attach and solder the end cross members, we better put some brass bearing cups in. Now you might have seen me do this before. Now some manufacturers of these brass bearing cups leave a small nipple on the top, and it can affect the way that the side frames or axle boxes sit on the model when you've installed them. It only takes a minute, so I always grip the bearing cup with a pair of tweezers and just file the top off. I do all the soldering for this sort of thing on an offcut of plywood, because unlike cutting mats, it doesn't tend to melt. And it also means I can drill holes in it for this type of thing. It gives me a more solid platform to drop a bearing cup into, ready for soldering. With the soldering iron applied to give a bit of heat, all it needs is a dab of solder to ensure that cup will never come out. Moving on, we'll fold up and solder the last of the bits off the fret, this being a pivot bar thing, and attach a screw, bolt, nut to the base plate that fixes to the vehicle that we're rebogeying. We can temporarily put some wheels into the bogie now, just so that we can get everything squared up and attach the end cross members. Even with a bending tool, sometimes the etched fold line isn't quite enough and it needs a little bit of help. Whether you lightly score it with a knife or a razor saw does help immensely. The cross members on this bogie are two different sorts. There's the solid type that goes at the back, and then there's one with a notch in it that goes at the front, and the NEM coupling pocket sits in that slot on the front one. Now this will be individual choice on the next bit, because I only solder one side of the end cross member so that I can fit the wheel sets in and out. I find it easier to do it that way than try and mask the wheel sets in position. Before we go to paint, we'll just fold up and solder the NEM coupling pocket and get that positioned in the correct place for the relevant vehicle that we're going to attach this bogie to. They'll all be different. But before we attach it to the bogie, we must make sure that a coupling will fit in the pocket. And you may have to cut this piece down to get it to fit. I mentioned a minute ago that everything that you attach these to will be different. I generally go with about 1 millimetre, 2 millimetres past the buffer but it does depend a lot on what vehicle you're attaching them to, how long it is, how sharp the curves you're trying to run around, also what vehicles it's going to be attached to. There's a lot of things that go into the mix when you're trying to work out where to position the coupling bar. There's a vast array of cosmetic sides in the MJT range, unless of course you make your own like I did in the DMU video. And normally attached with your preferred sticky substance, mine is ammaldite or whatever it's called these days. Finally off to paint, first of all I use bog standard Halford's grey primer. I've never had a problem with it lifting or anything else like that. I quite like it, even on brass. After that I go for the normal Revel number 9 Not Black. Back on the bench I can take the liquid mask out of the bearing cups and the coupling pocket, and then I can solder the loose end up, well, after I've inserted the wheels of course. Right at the end comes one of the fiddliest and trickiest bits of this whole little project, which is fixing the pivot box and attachments. I cursed more than once trying to get this fixing pin into those holes. There's a rude joke in there somewhere, but I'll let your crude minds fill in the punchline. Once in the right place, I normally fix this bar pin in place with some liquid mask, making sure that it doesn't seep through into the rest of the joint. And there we have one complete bogie built from MJT components, available from Dark Castings, a link in the description. And like I said at the beginning, this is just a reference video for a few projects that are upcoming, which will give me a little bit more time to do other things in those videos. I've got 2 or 3 projects on the go at the moment, so I'll hopefully be back in a couple of days' time with another video. But in the meantime, Happy New Year, and I will see you all in 2022.